Hi everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion on the challenges and opportunities with building diverse product teams. So for those who may not know me, my name is James Harris. My gender pronouns are he, him, his, and I am the People Operations Lead for the UK team at TransferWise. I'll be hosting today's discussion, and I'm joined by four fabulous panelists from Expedia, Hotwire, Coverflex, and TransferWise. And I'll of course be introducing you to each of them shortly. But firstly, why are we even here? Well, tech companies such as the ones being represented today are all on their own journey to improving diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Since to build a great company, you need a great product. But to build a great product, you need to have a diverse team of people working behind it to ensure it reaches a diverse base of customers. And if I talk briefly here about kind of my own journey at TransferWise, we've made great progress in serving over 8 million customers around the world, but we're still not covering a truly diverse customer base. And then if I think about our offices, we have many diversity and inclusion areas to focus on, whilst trying to overcome cultural challenges along the way, limitations with candidate pools, and yet still ensuring that we're able to scale our product with our growth. And it's then knowing where to start and where to place our focus, which has proven to be the biggest obstacle. But I guess this is where we can benefit from those in our product teams and how they approach problems. They go in and work with the metrics, analyze the problems to solve, test some of the actions that we've envisioned, understand what makes an impact, replicate it in other areas when we know what works. And hopefully from today's discussion with our product panelists, we'll be able to learn some of those kind of best practices and best practices from other businesses on D&I initiatives, to share experiences and challenges that they've all encountered along the way, and to start building awareness of our efforts towards diversity and inclusion, both for employees and also our customers, our external audiences. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand over now to our panelists so that we can all get acquainted with them. So if I could ask each of you, please, to share with us your name, your gender pronoun, the company you work at, and a little bit about your role and perhaps a touch on the background in the D&I space. Sarah, maybe I can start with you.
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone. My gender pronoun is she and her, if you say that right. So I've just finished working at a startup called Coverflex, and I'm about to start at a startup called Student Finance. So basically my role is that for the last few years, I've been working in early stage startups leading product. So basically my responsibilities are often building product teams from scratch. So across multi-functions, so engineering, data science, and product management, for example. And then also I'm typically responsible for figuring out the processes that we use as a team to develop products. So very much focused on how as a team we hire for diversity, and then how we are inclusive as a team. So I'm very excited to hopefully share learnings that I have, and also learn from the other panelists, and also any people in the audience as well.
Amazing, thank you, Sarah. Margot, maybe I can hand over to you next.
Sure enough. Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me. So she, her, hers, and Margot, and I feel like I was not intending to deceive, but I no longer work at Expedia, even though that's what it said on the thing. So I left a couple of months ago, and I'm actually currently working on a number of things, including a book on gender in tech, based on a pretty long, I don't feel the need to tell you how long, pretty long career in technology in the product space. I've mostly worked at large companies, had 2 separate stints at Microsoft, and have done a bunch of contracting for Starbucks, T-Mobile, other sort of biggies, and then most recently was at Expedia. One of the things that I will say quickly, James, is that I loved your intro sort of drawing this conversation to product, because what we're doing here is product. Product is not just putting bits on a screen. Product is creating better experiences, no matter who the customer is, and driving the strategy around that. And so I see diversity and inclusion as a very fundamentally product job. Is how do we create the most successful teams where the most possible people feel included and heard. So to me, like that, it's a strategy. We look at the data, we test and we learn. It's product. My own journey in D&I starts from a complete denial that it was an issue. Coming shortly out of college, just absolutely first, I mean, as an English major, I just didn't want to bother anybody. Very much like, thanks for letting me be here in this tech space. Into if I consider my gender as a barrier, like just very no, I don't want that to be part of my story. I was unable to balance here I am, a strong and competent person who is a victim of these forces outside my control. Like I couldn't make that work. And so for a long time, I very much stiff-armed all issues of gender and diversity. And in the last 5 years, have started really, going on the journey that I think a lot of us are on, which is you can be all kinds of strong and amazing and still be affected by systems that you had no part in building. And some of them are healthy and some of them are not. And what do we do from there? So that's sort of who I am, where I've been, and my diversity journey.
Amazing. Thank you, Margot. Thank you for sharing all of that. That's great. Brittany, can I hand over to you?
Hello, of course, and a quick thank you to you guys for bringing us together, because this is a pretty formidable female lineup. I'm not including myself in that, but it's such an honour and privilege to be here, and it's a great discussion we're starting. So yeah, my gender pronouns are she, her, hers. My name's Brittany. I lead business development in the UK for Hotwire. If you're unfamiliar with Hotwire, Hotwire is a global communications consultancy really specialising in tech, and fintech has been my real baby within the company, developing our clients, expertise and our network in that area. And thankfully I think it's been recognised. We're ranked as the #1 PR fintech agency in Chambers independent report. So hopefully all that good work is is paying off. And I think what attracted me to Hotwire is quite interesting. Hotwire talks a lot, and it's not just lip service. We do a lot for flexible working, building roles around an individual rather than making a role and trying to get an individual to fit into it. And I was definitely attracted by knowing that we had a badass female CEO, and across all of our offices in Europe, America, Australia, they're all led by women, which is really, unique and rare, especially in the world of tech, which is obviously so male dominated. My kind of like D&I role in Hotwire is comes from when I first joined the agency. I could see it was different, and it was committed to making a difference for the better in tech, which was quite exciting. So just within the first 6 weeks, I launched a global initiative called the F in Fintech. It is a network that is championed by women leading fintech on a mission to advance the industry by making it more inclusive for all minority groups. So it's a really exciting community. It's grown to over 500 members now globally. So yeah, anyone listening, I'd recommend after the session, have a Google, find out more about us, and please do join us.
Amazing. Thank you, Brittany. And Sharon, I'm going to hand over to you.
Hi, thanks, James. So I'm Sharon. I'm from TransferWise. My role at TransferWise is heading up our international expansion team. So we basically take TransferWise to all of the places where it isn't yet and try and grow it in all of the places where it's just got to. So basically anywhere apart from the UK, which is very exciting. My gender pronouns, thanks for asking, James, are her or they. I don't really mind either. What was the other question you asked me? Diversity is something I strongly believe in, of course. I don't for a minute think I represent all of the different diverse groups, but I strongly believe that the more of them you have, the stronger your team is. And that's partly because of the culture that creates, which is very accepting and tolerant, and people aren't scared to fail and that kind of thing. But also just more different opinions is generally the way to build a better product, because more ideas equals more power in my view. And we're trying to do that at TransferWise. We've definitely got a long way to go. We're a fintech, so we're not going to pretend for a minute that we have the perfect diverse team, but we've definitely got some good ideas about how to improve it, and we're already trying a few things out which I think are starting to have an effect. So it's nice to be part of that in my role here.
I was just struggling to find the unmute button. That was fun. Thank you, Sharon. Awesome. For those that are watching the call, if you do have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Zoom chat. We've got a bit of time at the end where we can reflect on those. But I thought I would start with one of our first questions for the panelists, and I don't mind who starts us off. But as leaders and product managers, we know that building inclusive teams takes time and focused effort, as I know we all know. Could you give some examples of any immediate and tangible actions that you've taken so far, and like what your approach has been in doing so?
I don't want to jump in. I'm happy to give a start.
Please do.
Sure. So one of the things that I tried a couple of years ago when I was on a leadership team, and I felt like we were not really doing the work, and I also didn't really know what the work was, but I felt like that was something that we could and should learn together. And Expedia had all these numbers it was constantly throwing out and all these metrics, but they were just numbers. We're going to have 30% of our VP levels and above be women, but we were doing the odd diversity training, but it hadn't become a daily discussion. And so one thing I thought was, let's map this to our OKRs, which is the only thing to do if anything's going to succeed. So let's actually map these numbers and start talking among ourselves. So I went to my leadership team, which was, as it has often been in my career, 6 dudes and me, which is fine, very comfortable. It's fine, but it is also a little bit odd sometimes being the person who represents diversity, although there's scarcely ever been a whiter person than me, but on my team, I was the diverse. And so it's a little bit tricky being that person always, but that's what there was. And I went to my LT and I said, if we can talk about this, are you guys willing to give this 5 or 10 minutes every other LT meeting? So that was every other week. I'll start, and just come with something you noticed, whether it's that seemed sexist, or how do I draw this person in when I can't really understand their accent, or like whatever it is, no holds barred. As an LT, let's ask ourselves and each other, and let's start struggling with the issues. And then after we've done it for a while, let's start carrying that out. And that was one thing that really I think helped, because it helped cement our LT together, but it also made it very clear in that sort of spreading it out from a place way, just starting that conversation rather than, not instead of, but okay, everybody go off and do a diversity training for a day, just building it more in our, this is a thing we talk about. It isn't a scary thing we talk about, and it is a safe thing to talk about. And whether you're on the powerful side of the power dynamic or the less powerful side, you should feel safe coming with your questions. And we started that in our LT. And then many of the members of my LT started doing it with their own teams. And so that was a thing I found to be really effective.
Yeah, it's interesting how you talked about kind of building into OKRs as well. That's a really insightful way to kind of build more accountability and ownership across the board. So that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Sarah, it looks like you've unmuted.
Oh, sorry, go on, Sarah.
Sorry, Sharon. So building inclusive teams, I think what I found building teams is that it's really important to make sure people feel empowered and like they're going to be listened to and heard. So especially often as the leader of the team or in a leadership role within the team, it's very important to show that you're open-minded to hearing diverse opinions, and that you're willing to even change your mind as well. So a few tangible actions that I've done towards that end in the past are, first of all, just starting out with when a decision is being made and making sure to actually ask the team what their opinion is towards that decision, and make sure that they actually feel listened to before the decision is made. And then sometimes another action is more about creating structured sessions for ideation that ensures that everybody gets a chance to be creative and talk about ideas, and that you encourage people to actually constructively build on each other's ideas. Because something I've noticed is that often the less diverse people in the room are the most comfortable at telling people their ideas, and also the most comfortable at voicing their concerns about other people's ideas. And so one specific structured session I like is called the 6 hats thinking, or something along those lines, which is really nice because it kind of forces everyone to put on their creative hats, their supportive hats, and then much later down the line, potentially to say any doubts they have. So that's one example. And then I think the third thing about helping people feel like they're listened to and that they're empowered to speak is trying to create a culture or a team where we don't really accept interruptions. So really calling out if someone interrupts, like I just interrupted Sharon, and sort of even calling it out for other team members, because I think often if you're the one that is interrupted, perhaps you're not the person that will actually say anything. So just kind of making it okay to say, oh, hang on a second, Sharon didn't quite finish her point, for example, it is kind of something I found really positive. So then people start to be able to feel like they can speak more, and often the quiet people have really good ideas, but you have to nurture those ideas to be spoken about.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Just on the interruptions piece, is that because I know that some companies use like bias interrupters, so they actually have like people in the meetings to actually make notes of those moments where people have interrupted. I didn't know if that's the approach or whether it's just more of a organic cultural thing that you're trying to build there.
No, but so how does that work? Do you then get it reported back to you later, like your report of, oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so somebody would just be like, you know, if perhaps a male voice spoke over a female voice, it will be that sort of like, you know, making notes of those things, because it might not be picked up on in the meeting. But to have somebody solely focused on that can help kind of drive like where you need to focus your attention.
I think that's a really, it's more, that's a great idea. It's more, I think in the teams I'm talking about, it's more about just making it okay to sort of say, oh, I haven't quite finished my point, or oh, can we just hear the rest of their point? It can be polite, right? It doesn't have to make you feel bad. And I'm definitely I interrupt people as well when I get excited about an idea. So it doesn't always mean that you're a bad person, right? It just happens.
Right. Fair.
I think we're all nodding now. We're all like, I've got an extra point on that.
Please do.
And Zoom is terrible for making you interrupt, isn't it? I wanted to add to Sarah's point, because I think showing that willingness to learn and listen and empowering others to speak is so important. And I'm speaking from, I'm not in a role where I'm building teams. So I'm kind of looking at from the other perspective. I might be in the team that's being built. And I love things like reverse interviews, or giving somebody more junior, or, you know, who wouldn't typically lead a meeting, and just giving them total ownership. Give, you know, a theme and topic. We want to discuss diversity in the business today. Take a couple of days, come up with an agenda, or run with it in the meeting. What questions you want to ask the group? And I think you get some really different ideas and perspectives, and it's a lot easier to speak up when one of your peers is leading the session, rather than obviously one of your bosses leading the session. And it makes us all a little nervous and a little a little dry on the throat. So I think it's such an easy thing to do, and something that everybody enjoys, and it takes the pressure off of leadership as well, running one of those meetings all the time, coming up with the ideas. So I love those reverse style interviews and meetings. I think they're very easy to do. I've got my dog snoring in the background, so forgive. I've dulled him with my answer, so I'm going to stop now, but that's what that noise is.
Amazing. But I'm sure he was thrilled with your response. Like, it's not, amazing. Sharon, were you going to say something?
I was, yeah. I'm fine to go last. It's okay. I guess just listening to that, one reflection was that at TransferWise, we're a bit different because we don't have a traditional hierarchy. whereby, you know, you don't have a leadership team where you can talk to them and say, hey, we're all going to do this thing together, and then it's going to permeate. In many ways, that might feel like an easier way to start something, but like you just can't do that here. But the good thing about that is that you get people just growing stuff from whatever level, like from the most grassroots level. And that's kind of what I found when I joined around like diversity. There were a bunch of people that were talking about it. Specifically, we were talking about women in our product team. Like that was one slice of diversity that we definitely need to work on. And some of the PMs had really seen this. I mean, they were living it, so it was pretty obvious to them, and they'd got the data and they talked about it. And like that's something that I could do from day one. I joined and I was like, wow, I can see these numbers. I'm just going to talk about it because another person talking about it is leverage, and that's a good thing. And that plus calling out anything you see that is not good, like, you know, people interrupting in meetings, like I've seen that plenty of times, and you can just call them out, or you can just help to create an environment where the person who maybe got talked over can just get their time afterwards to talk. So I've definitely done some of those things. But I think the other thing that I could immediately do was I'm hiring people, I'm a hiring manager, so I can immediately put my views into action there by ensuring that we do what I feel is a good and diverse, inclusive process. And there were definitely things that we could change, like our sourcing when we get candidates applying to us. That's where our problem is in terms of women in our product team. Like we just didn't get any women applying, basically. Like numbers were so low that there was just very limited chance that they'd actually get through. And that's something we've already started to change. Like it's a pretty easy one to change when you think about it. Like you can start sourcing, you can look for people, and immediate actions, like that's one of them. But the hard stuff takes longer. The cultural change, you can't do that in weeks or months. Like it does take probably more like years. And I'd love to hopefully hear some tips from everyone else here about how they're tackling that stuff, because I think that's what we've got to do longer term at TransferWise, is actually find ways to build that culture much more like systemically, that we can do this at scale. We're 2,500 people. Me talking about stuff isn't going to cut it. Like I just don't have that much leverage.
Thank you. And it's knowing that like we've all got to get comfortable with we've got to get comfortable with actually talking about it. And it can be a very, I think if the conversation is too comfortable, then we're not doing something right. Like it needs to have that moment of discomfort, but we also need to know that it is going to take years to see eventual change, and for that not to kind of dampen any kind of drive to keep going, because that can feel, when you're not getting the results, it can feel a little bit like, oh, what are we doing this for? Where do we start? But it's knowing like we're going to all need to contribute on that road ahead. Sharon, maybe if I could start with you on the next question, because I was conscious I missed you out at the start. But a lot of leaders in tech know that they need to focus on D&I because it's important. They hear it's the right thing to do, but maybe the penny hasn't fully dropped as to why it matters for them, so that they go beyond just kind of giving the green light to initiatives, and actually they're true champions of it themselves. How do we take leaders on that journey to kind of get them becoming active advocates that want to lead on making the change?
I'm not sure. I think that's a really interesting question, and I'm more of a product expert than a diversity expert. Like I would absolutely not profess to be an expert. Like I'm learning, I'm listening, and trying to do the right thing, but I'm really not. I'm not an expert even about women in product, to be honest. Like I found my way into it, but I don't fully understand all the reasons why some people don't. I think like there's a couple of things that I think can help. So you can demonstrate the impact of it. And like a good example for us at TransferWise is the time it takes us to hire people, which is far too long in the product team, particularly with senior roles. And I'm convinced that if we have a bigger pool of candidates that we can go to and that we can engage, and that they actually consider us as well because they think we're someone that they'd like to work for, then we will hire faster and we will hire great people quicker. And that will be a good thing for our product because we'll build it faster and we'll reach more customers. And I'm pretty confident we'll be able to demonstrate that in over the course of maybe a year or two. And if you can do that, then what senior leader isn't going to say yes? Everyone wants to grow the team and build the product faster because whatever kind of metrics you're after, it usually is going to help. Whether it's your bottom line or whether it's your number of customers or whatever. So I do think that one is really important. And the other one is just being in the room. So I'm in one of those teams where I'm the only woman. I've done it before. This is not the most extreme one, but it is me and 5 guys. And just the fact that I'm there probably makes a difference. And I can't fully articulate why. But I think that's something we should all be aware of. If we're in a room and we're a minority in some way, then our being there is very powerful, and we're probably going to have an influence on some of those people that, you know, ultimately would like to get them to be a bit more empathetic or get them to be a bit more engaged. I'm really convinced that does have an impact, but I find it harder to articulate exactly why, and I'd love to hear everyone else's thoughts on that. It'd be good if we could codify it, because then maybe it would be a bit more scalable and used more widely.
Part of me thinks if leadership don't get it, then, I mean, if I was talking to anybody that was working within an organisation that felt like there was really like coming against a brick wall when it comes to leadership understanding why it mattered, I'd say just go elsewhere. You're so in demand. There's more roles than, you know, how large the talent pool is, and there's so much, you know, leaders should care about the numbers. There's so much data to back why it matters from a financial perspective and, you know, a business performance perspective. I think like McKinsey's latest report, I think called Diversity Wins, showed that like the top quartile of more like diverse organizations will really financially outperform the bottom quartile. So, you know, if you're a senior leader, you should be caring about the bottom line. You should be caring about retaining talent. And I think a recent Deloitte study, I'll have a look after this session, showed that, you know, an organization's commitment to D&I, like it mattered to 70% of employees, and whether they would stick around in an organization, that was a big factor for them. So if your leadership team, those stats are so hard to argue with if they're not even on board with that, and you'd kind of hope that we'd all be proud to work for an organisation, proud to be working in that industry and want to improve it and want to better it, that are they worth the time? I don't know if that's a very popular answer, but there's plenty of organisations out there with leaders that really do care, and if you're within the organisation, I'd say head for them.
Yeah, true. And I think to the points being discussed, like, and I don't profess either to be a D&I expert at all, but it's just more from I mean, I work in people operations, but even outside of that, it's just that kind of basic, like just that human equality piece that I'm sure we're all obviously advocates of and want to see that. But having said that, like, we don't know how best to tackle this. We don't know where to place our immediate focus, and we may not also know everything about each of the different characteristics that are disadvantaged. But I think it's just important, you know, as we've all been saying, is just to open up the conversation about it and to be open to wanting to learn, to wanting to understand, to want to make change. And I think like what we've seen here, particularly at TransferWise, is actually just giving that platform to those that have got those disadvantages. So I was part of a LGBT discussion panel where we talked about some of the challenges that we'd faced, and it was the first time for some of just trying to understand that journey. And it's just so powerful. It's just like a Zoom meeting. That's all it took to just try and get people to understand more. So yeah, I definitely resonate with the points being shared.
I think it requires some bravery from leadership team as well to admit that we don't know all the answers. None of us here have all the answers for everything. So if we can create open spaces where we can talk freely and look for help, then, you know, we can solve those challenges together. Hence you putting on this webinar, great example of doing that.
For sure.
I also think in a world where for some reason you were stuck in a team where people didn't see a need for diversity and didn't really see the problem, that for me, one of the things that's helped me to like really understand the problem better, and a bit like Margot had mentioned earlier in her introduction about how perhaps for a while you almost pretended that there wasn't really a problem. For me, it was like when I first started reading some really powerful books that I started to better understand like where I sat within an organization, being who I am and being a woman, and also sort of realizing some of the other challenges other people have from different backgrounds. So, you know, to name drop, I think my big breakthrough book was Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. And then obviously Invisible Women, I think like everybody in every leadership team should read it. And then also Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race is just such a kind of eye-opening book about sort of understanding what's happening in when and sort of seeing it more and more now, because something that gets mentioned in that book is that often when you bring up the racism that does exist in the UK, for example, often white people will be very defensive about it. And it's interesting once you've read that book and then you see it happen. So I think just like giving people the means to start educating about the kind of problems that are there will then probably help them to go back into their organizations and actually see those problems happening live. Yeah.
For sure.
I could go on about this for a really long time, so shut me right up. First, I think one of the best things I've seen, Sharon, was your answer. The question got dealt to you, how do we bring leaders along? And your first answer, it was so beautiful, I hope it's on tape, was, I'm not sure. That is the best answer a leader can start with. When we, in my view, when leaders are open with their own uncertainty, it goes back to what Sarah was saying again, you know, it is, but I'm not sure is such a good answer. And then followed with your own, you know, the things that you're trying. Also, to Brittany's point, there's piles of data. The McKinsey report is so good. There's no dearth of data. And when you look at any group of people, let alone any group of leaders, people are going to be motivated by different things. Some are going to be motivated by, oh, it's the numbers, we will win, right? Some are going to have the competitive motivation. We'll win if we do this. Some of them are much more motivated by doing the right thing. I want to be an executive who does the right thing. There are different things that motivate different people. And I think that really drives toward one way to get leaders to start really caring about this, not just because it's on a list, is to have an executive team or have any group of leaders, no matter what, you know, if it's a product team, do their own personal work. People do better if they're speaking not from a mandate that came at them from a rule, but as converts, people who really believe it. And the way, in my view, to help people do their own personal work, whether they do it together or they do it separately, certainly some reading recommendations is great. Sarah, I'm going to hit you up later. Lean In drove me absolutely crazy. I know everybody has a different feeling on that book, and that's where the conversations are, right? I loved it. Oh my gosh, I hated it. Let's talk about that. Let's approach with curiosity rather than certainty. I don't need to convince you of my viewpoint. I want to come and hear about yours. The biggest thing I think in all of these conversations is to deload the vocabulary and de-blame the conversation. We need to be able to approach saying, all of us, it isn't white people, straight people, men, let alone straight white men, are evil. It is, we all grew up within systems that helped us learn to behave a certain way, and we are all acting out those systems all the time. And so when we talk about whiteness or gender issues, it isn't, we need to find a way to talk about it without blaming the more powerful group and victimizing the disenfranchised group. Instead say, we are all victims. We are all at the mercy of these systems in which we grew up. And so it isn't Margot's fault or James's fault. I think that's a really important thing to do. I think one thing that's incredibly important is to deload the vocabulary, for example, of privilege. Privilege is not a thing we do. Privilege is a thing that happened to us. You could take an alien who had no gender, no race, put it in a white man suit in America, and it would be perceived in certain ways, and it would be deferred to in certain ways. That privilege just happened to it. It's not the alien's fault. And I think as we start to de-blame the conversation, that's a really important thing to do, is say, privilege is a way that the world responds to you. It's something you need to understand about yourself, but we don't need to make you feel crappy about it, that you got it. You just got it. That's just a thing. So that's, I could go on forever and ever. Those are some of the things that I think are very, very important when we talk about this, because it is, nobody reacts well when they are brought into a room and told how biased they are. People will react much better when they are led to understand the systems, led to understand your complicity in this does not mean you're bad. Your complicity in this means you're human inside some systems that don't work for everyone. So let's look at that.
That's great. Thank you so much. And yet we do spend a lot of time in this, like talking about privilege, talking about fragility, and actually we need to be talking about what are we going to do? And that's definitely where the energy needs to focus.
And when we get into the blamey space, then we have to go through that whole defensiveness phase, and that's so tedious. Like, if nothing else, it's a waste of my time and yours.
Very true. Brittany, I'm going to start with you on this next question. According to some practices that some companies adopt to obviously try and tackle the beast that is diversity and inclusion, improving diversity is best tackled sometimes by understanding where the gaps are. So whether that's you're focused on age, you're focused on gender, perhaps in certain areas of the company, so product, for example, and then specifically targeting the people that fit within that demographic. How do you go about it at your company? Is that the same approach? Do you take a more general blanket view on D&I? How does it work there?
Well, I think I suppose coming from a comms agency, I better give the comms answer, but I think it's a really important one. I personally joined Hotwire because I applied to Hotwire because I liked how they was communicating about themselves. They was talking about being a flexible working policy, that they would build a career around me, for me, and I could see all this amazing female talent leading all the different offices, and a female CEO, and all that were quite like myself, maybe a little loud, a little confident, a little quirky, and I could see an opportunity for progression. So it brought me to Hotwire. So I think having diverse role models, or making sure you have role models for whatever demographic you want to target, is so important. And I'm sure for like all the fintech audience, Anne Bowden is one of the most well-known CEOs in fintech, and she sees it as a really important part of her role to be really active in the public eye in order to attract more female talent for their product teams, and it works. So they continue using that strategy. But and I think you can also look at training spokespeople, not just having the leadership team as spokespeople, but looking at other levels of your organization. So I love that phrase, you can't be what you can't see. The STEM pool isn't big enough. If we want more people to apply, to train, to join, you need to be able to see someone like yourself in that role. So, look around, train up a spokesperson, and let them do their thing. And, you start getting more diverse talent actually apply for the role. And then I think another great example of what to do when, if you're doing that and it's working, is then having a diverse interview panel as well. I know RBS is a good example if they have a really strong commitment to that, because we're all human and we have the tendency to kind of get along with people just like ourselves, warm to them easier, trust them easier, and then you end up hiring somebody just like yourself, and that's not helpful. Not helpful in this scenario when you're looking for a more diverse range of people. So it's something that I've been really pleased about, that the FM FinTech's actually been able to help with, because a company like RBS, the scale of it might be a bit easier to create a diverse interview panel. If you're a small scale up or a startup and you're looking around and you're like, okay, well, there's me and a few other founders, all from the same school, all look like each other, how do I make a diverse interview panel out of us, you know, other than playing dress up and, I don't know, creating a new identity for yourself on the day, which I wouldn't advise that. I'm an actor, but I still wouldn't do that. You know, you can reach out to a community, reach out to people that you respect and you value, like I would do that to any of the individuals in this room. I think, could you join me on my interview panel, please? And I'll return the favour for you. So you're getting a fresh outside perspective. And I think that to me, if I was being interviewed, would send me a really strong message about that organisation's commitment to D&I as well. If I'm looking at a diverse panel, there's somebody on the panel that looks and sounds like me, I'd think I can progress here. You know, but if I'm in an organisation that's doing all the right thing in removing unconscious bias from your recruitment processes and trying quotas, but still all the messages and images I see are like of a fintech boys club, am I going to apply? Probably not. Even if a recruiter manages to get me into the interview room, am I going to accept the job? Am I going to stay around long? Probably not. So yeah, now it's my turn I'm so passionate about this one, but I think, like, to summarize, spokespeople, so important, and diverse interview panel, such a simple idea, but I think it stops you making a kind of a hiccup along the way when your intentions are good.
Can I do a quick both and to that, just a little pile on? I think that everything you said is so important, Brittany, and the addendum I would add, whether you're making an OKR about a percentage of women or the very important addendum to that is, without ever relaxing our very high standards. Every time we talk about including diversity, what I don't ever want to do is have a bunch of more enfranchised people, say white men, feel like, well, I don't have a chance now. So we want to be able to say, while maintaining our standards, like, it's absolutely possible to maintain our standards and be more diverse, because we don't want to do, in my view, we've come perilously close to having a whole group of very powerful people start to get pretty, and I'm not going to say they shouldn't be uncomfortable, but start to feel like, well, I'm super effed, because it's all about reaching out to women. It's all about reaching out to people of color. And I think what we want to say is there's enough room for everyone. This comes from a set of congratulations I got when I got a big promotion once, and 3 different people, one of whom was a woman, said, it's a great time to be a woman at Expedia. So not only do we make some people uncomfortable, but we can also cut the feet out from under the people in the less disenfranchised group when we don't always talk about our attempts when we don't always accompany our diversity work with this certainty that we are going to get the highest quality team, which is going to be a diverse team, and no person of color, no LGBTQ, no one should ever feel like they were a diversity hire. It's not good for anyone. So I just want to accompany all of the brilliant things you said with this, like, let's be sure to do that in our language.
And you know, I totally agree with that. And I think the way you do it is you raise the bar for everyone. You raise the bar for everyone. If you raise the bar for everyone, you know, because we all receive some positive discrimination in some form or another. And there's a phrase, something I remember Louise Beaumont said to me once as well, which always sticks with me, is people often don't like positive discrimination when it doesn't favor them. They don't have as much of an opinion on it the rest of the time. They don't see it then. If you raise the bar for everyone, and, you know, think outside of particular schools for education, you know, even particular degrees. I know I come from a very humble and modest background of school dinners and council estates, and I've worked kind of really hard to get to where I am. And I think it's people that have kind of got that determination and drive, they're who you're looking for. So raise the bar for absolutely everybody, and then you definitely don't lose on quality, and you also kind of open up that diversity range that you have as well in your team.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Like, I think, so one of the things that I was really clear on when we were talking about this in our product teams was actually the product job's not for everyone. And I don't think we should be scared to say that. Like, because it's not, like, not everyone's going to be a product manager. And that's got nothing to do with diversity. That's just got to do with, like, some people like doing product management and some just aren't going to be well suited to it. But what you can do is explain really clearly what you're looking for and what that person is going to be doing. And like the amount of job descriptions on the internet where it does neither of those things is just ridiculous. Like, you know, it gives you some waffly stuff that's pulled from some competency framework somewhere that means nothing. And it doesn't tell you what your job's going to look like, and it doesn't tell you what the expectations of you are going to be. And if you can do that, then like, and put it in plain English and put it in language that isn't going to make people run a mile because they're not, I don't know, like not of a certain background, then I feel like that's probably one of the most positive things you can do to attract diverse people to your team. And like, you know, I don't think you should be afraid to say, hey, look, this role has these things about it and you're going to be doing these things each day. Because if that does put off some people, like that's not a problem. That's not about diversity, in my opinion. I do think it's a subtle line. Like you can, I'm sure some people would try and justify putting in some exclusivity type things and say, hey, actually it's about the role. You need to have come from this background because it will make you better at having debates or something like that. Like, that's not cool. But being really explicit about what are you meant to be doing and what are your expectations, I feel like that can only be a good thing. And the bar should be high, right? I think for product roles particularly, like they're very demanding and you shouldn't shy away from that. Because ultimately if you bring someone in and they're not ready for it, they're going to have a terrible experience. Like they're not going to enjoy it, and you're probably going to have to help them figure out that actually that wasn't a good decision, and you know it's a waste of everyone's time.
For sure. Sarah, I thought I'd like to start with you with the next question, make sure we get through them all. With I guess with startups, they love to hire for cultural fit, and fast growth startups often sacrifice efforts in D&I for, you know, the interest in hiring speed. You know, the priority is to fill the role. We're understaffed. We just need to get the heads in. What does culture fit mean to you and your company, and how do you prevent it from becoming an excuse to always hire the same type of people? Yeah,
so I think that from my experience in a bunch of startups with often a lot of people that look the same, I'm often bringing the diversity. The first startup I joined here was basically 80% Portuguese blokes who were all engineers, and then a spattering of other people that look different. And I think what I've seen time and again is I think cultural fit has become a bit of a dated word, because I actually think people will change to fit a culture. So just because I talk to someone right now and this is the way they act, and you know, maybe I don't feel like getting stuck in a lift with them today, as the classic cliche culture fit interview question would go. People, if they like a team and they like a product, they will change to adapt to perform within the culture that team creates. So I've seen that for the positive and the negative. Sometimes, well, the positive one first, perhaps. So a few years ago, I worked in a fintech company in London where the culture was to be very customer focused and to speak to at least the customer success team a lot, and also to actually do customer user testing. And you could see as people joined that they became more interested in learning about the customer, and that typically ideas should be brought with evidence about what the customer wanted. Whereas equally on the other side, more recently I joined a startup where unfortunately the culture was a little bit toxic. And then like truly good people, like I think they were genuinely good people who were intelligent, you could see that they would pick up traits of the toxic culture in order to kind of perform within that team. And so bringing it back to, for me, what culture fit means is, does this person want to fit in with the culture that we're trying to create? And do they believe in the same core values that will equip them to be able to fit into that culture? So that was kind of like the first part of your question. I think the other part about how do you know, in a startup, it's really hard to hire. You don't have the budget to offer competitive in the market rates. You don't have brand awareness. You can't pay for expert recruiters. And yet you are wearing so many hats that you don't necessarily have, or you don't necessarily give the time you should to hiring. And so it's very easy to fall into a habit of just hiring people that look like you. And as an example, I've been offered roles in startups before that are the kind of opposite to how it should be. So through my friends, I'll be introduced to a founder. Maybe we'll go for lunch, maybe we'll go for coffee and we'll talk about big picture stuff. Maybe I'll meet the team or the investors, and then I'll have a job offer. So I think to kind of counteract what good looks like, or what I try to bring in when I join a startup, is to first of all make sure you actually articulate and advertise the role, which probably sounds really obvious for everyone here because you're in more structured organizations. And then I think it's really important to not overweight the interview. It was articulated really well in the book Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, about how actually looking back over time, how someone performed in an interview was not predictive of how well they would then perform in the job. But on the other side, hiring managers massively overweight how someone performs in an interview compared to their past experience, compared to the application that they do, etc. So I think finding ways to test people that isn't just based on conversations is really important. Like, as an obvious one, giving people challenges and then figuring out together how you work together, I find it to be quite effective. I think the third one, kind of harking back to what I was saying about the values, is really taking the time to think about what core values do we hold close in our team, and then finding ways to like ask interview questions to test if people have those values, or not have those values, but if they also rate those values and prioritize those values. Sorry, I spoke for ages too.
Yeah, no, it's really important, and it's just important to make sure also that culture fit doesn't feel too exclusive, because it can be very much like you need to fit in with the rest of the team, i.e. you need to be like us. So we have to be really careful that that doesn't become too, perhaps more of like a values fit piece rather than culture fit, is one take on it as well.
Yeah, I really liked, Sarah, I really liked your point about people being able to change. And like, I think that's really true. Like, I think hiring for someone's potential is a way better strategy than hiring based on what they did before, because for a start, they might not have enjoyed what they were doing before. They might have been in some awful job, especially if they're at the start of their career. They just jumped and they got into something because they knew they needed to get that year of experience, and maybe it didn't work out for them. And if you judge them on that, then that's just so short-sighted. And like, I think like some of the things that are typically warning signals there, or like positive warning signals, like if you talk to someone and they're clearly really keen to learn, they're really good at taking feedback, you know, if you challenge them, they don't get defensive, they get excited and they want to like question and have a discussion, and you know, they adapt. Like, those things to me are far more important than like, are they just like a little mini you, or are they someone that's got this exact background that looks like the perfect fit for your new role. Although that's not to say that, you know, if you do find a mini you that's a perfect fit for the role, it could work out really well. If you're in a big enough team, then probably there is room for that as well, right? It's about diversity, so you shouldn't discount people that are like you either. So yeah, it's an interesting one, but I really like that idea that people will change. And I think if you can look for things that are important that they don't change, like that flexibility and adaptability, that to me feels like a really good way to not have a negative culture fit kind of paradigm in your organization.
Can I add to that? I think it's so true. Somebody's attitude and their values aligning with your organization is so much more important, rather than what was the job available to them in the which will have, you know, which will be impacted by the state of the economy in that time, and how badly they needed a job perhaps, and you know, how just needed to pay rent, is so much more important. And I think what you then have to really remember is, when you are hiring people from maybe a very different background that haven't had the experience that others in your organization might have had, to make sure that you are giving them extra support, because otherwise you're doing the right thing by hiring them, but you're setting them up to fail, because you're putting them around people that have all had similar experiences, or have that you can't all go through the same process of joining a company if you've had a different background. So it's having some sort of buddy, or making sure you're providing extra training, extra check-in points, so that you're setting them up for success along that whole journey.
Great, thank you, panel. I do have some other questions as well, but we've also got questions from the audience, and I want to make sure we squeeze everything in. But we could, as we all profess, we could talk about this for quite some time, because it's such a layered and fascinating topic. But I do want to make sure that we spend some time with the audience. So we've had a couple of questions come through. So we have been talking about how we're using data to drive conversations internally. Sinead asked, to what extent is that data being kept relevant and up to date? So is it captured through just like a static annual or biannual anonymous survey? Is it done in real time through any HRES system, through onboarding, any kind of career maps or progression models, anything like that at all that anyone on the panel can share?
I'm happy to start on this one because it's quite a live topic for us at TransferWise. So when we started, it was very hacky. We literally kind of went through our list of people in the team and thought, right, we think that's what this person is, and we think that's what that person is, which is clearly not 100% accurate and is probably not the best way to do things. But we wanted something, we just needed like somewhere to start. And I think on balance, I think that's probably okay. We've got good intentions and you're doing your best to be data driven. That's what we had at that point. And that was about the gender balance in our product team. If we were trying to do that on things like race or sexuality or any other markers, I would feel way less comfortable about doing that. I don't even know if you could, to be honest. And when you get to thinking about, well, how do you ask people for that information? That's not always straightforward either. Like, not everyone wants to tell you, right? Like, I'm definitely not an expert in that area, but I think there's a lot of sensitivity around talking about any of those things in the UK, but even more so in other countries. So we've got offices in Singapore and America and other cities in Europe, and there's definitely very different laws and there's very different cultural expectations in those places. So how you do this at scale is something we've thought about, and we are starting to ask people who apply to TransferWise to tick some boxes and tell us if they're happy to. Some stuff about them. So we will talk a bit more about this on probably some of our public blogs, and it's certainly not something that I'm personally doing all by myself. We've got a very good people team. I'm not going to try and reel off all their titles, but we have a team that are thinking about collecting this data and then obviously how we use it to figure out where we need to act on it. And they're going to try and do it in a more structured way. But at the end of the day, you can't force people to give you that information. So I think we're all a bit open-minded about exactly what level of quality is that data going to have. But at the end of the day, that's not a reason not to do it. If you've got something, it's probably better than nothing. And even by doing it, you're still raising that conversation and saying, this is important to us and we want to do something about it. And we're going to be honest and say we're not perfect and we probably haven't got all the answers, but that's way better than just pretending it's not a problem. So really, really interesting topic. And I, again, love to hear from anyone else who's had experience of doing this. I'm sure no one's solved it 100%, but I think personally at TransferWise, I think we should really look to learn from others who are probably further ahead with that kind of structure around collecting information and acting on it at scale, because it's pretty new for us. We're not a 20-year-old company. We're much younger than that, and we are towards the start of our journey of becoming more representative of our customers.
Well, as someone who's a veteran of many 20-year-old companies, I can speak a little bit to data, and I would say that what the data about hiring, there's really two batches of data that we should be looking at. One is, what is our company doing, and another is, what do we know about representation in the world? What do we know about what happens when a woman gets angry in a meeting compared to when a man gets angry in the meeting? How is she perceived compared to how is he perceived? There's piles of data on how we react to different people, to different bodies differently, different whatever person suit we happen to be wearing. So I would say, I think Brittany was the asker, or no, sorry, I don't remember. I would say to the person whose name I'm sorry I didn't jot down. It's a great idea for all of us to be very serious about the data that our company is keeping, but it's also a very important idea to think about data, all of the different data that's out there, and use it not as an answer, but as a question. Use it as a conversation piece. Here's what we know, and instead of saying, damn it, it's not enough, say, here's what we know. Why do you think that is? Here's what we know. Like, our data looks great, but it feels weird here. I speak to my teams all the time about data-driven decision-making, and I'm always like, I don't want data in the driver's seat. I want a person with a brain in the driver's seat. And we can do data-informed decision-making. I know that's not a popular phrasing, but when data's in the driver's seat, we can do anything we want with data, and I'm sure all of us have seen that happen. So instead, let's use the data as a way to think about our jobs, as a way to think about our companies, and not think it's going to bring us the answer so much as it's going to bring us a series of important questions. And then also, when we think about data, let's try to look out into the larger world of data, and not just at what our own company is doing, but what do we know? We know that, I'll throw out one that I am pretty interested in, and that is, it's not just about attracting diverse candidates, but retaining them. And attraction is the easier part. Retention is harder. And one thing that we know is through data of 1,000 companies across the English-speaking world is if a woman comes to a meeting late and says, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I'm late, I had to drop off the kids, she is less likely to get promoted. If a man comes to a meeting with the same thing, he is more likely to be promoted. Simply because a man is more likely to, oh, he's so well-rounded, what a good guy. What do we do with that data? The thing we do with that data is challenge our assumptions, challenge the things that we see, and be like, oh, how do I, when a man talks about his kids, do I get all melty and, oh, he's so great? And when a woman talks about her kids, am I a little bit, well, she's a little not focused on the problem at hand. It's using data as this constant source of self-inquiry and company inquiry, I would say is an important thing to do.
Amazing, so powerful and so true. I can
definitely do it.
Yeah, for sure. And there are ways you can, I mean, it's important to talk about it and address it and to call it out, and also to make sure, any parental leave policies and things like that are favorable to both sexes, and all of that stuff, like all of that can really help change the narrative there. But yeah, thank you for sharing. Brittany and Sarah, I thought I could jump to the second question from the audience, to you both. So when you both consider diversity and inclusion, do you also typically consider different experiences to achieve increased diversity rather than just focusing on gender, race, so the characteristics themselves? Do you also, how do you then focus on the experiences? So I guess that's more of the inclusion side, because it's all well and good, hiring diverse, but then they need to feel comfortable once they're in your employ.
Who should go first, Sarah? We neither of us want to interrupt one another. We both want to be polite.
So I think we're up earlier.
I'll go quickly then. I think it raises an interesting point with, unfortunately, there's so many different types of diversity, or different pillars. We've got gender, we've got race, we've got neurodiversity. We have that one hasn't even cropped up today. And unfortunately, they're all in competition with one another, and it would be nice if they weren't, but that's just the reality of it. So I think making sure that you give time and you give an opportunity for each one of those diversity pillars to have a voice within your organisation is really important, and not to think like, oh, we did loads for International Women's Day this year, we've kind of ticked off diversity, and as a result you've forgotten about everything else that diversity means. And on the inclusion piece, I think, here's where leadership can play a huge part. So I think hopefully a nice example that came out of Hotwire for World Mental Health Day was I created a book on everybody's that felt comfortable sharing personal experiences with different mental health issues. It's something else that I feel really, really passionate about. And it's one of the most fantastic things I think that I've been involved in. And we had our CEO sharing very, very personal stories about her own, struggles with depression and anxiety. And every right down to our kind of like most junior grads, our execs, their stories. And I thought, and it was such a nice way to really bring the whole organization together and make a safe space to talk about something, and really remind everyone, or show people internally that if this is if this resonates with you, you're in the right organization. We trust you, we welcome you, we'll support you. So if you can do things like that really bring the whole organization together to talk about something that's a bit taboo or a bit sensitive, that's definitely made it difficult, I think, for me to leave Hotwire now, because I think for other organizations, am I going to feel that supported? Am I going to feel like the organization is that safe of a space for me to talk about my most traumatic life moments, and it be published in a book, and I'd be next to like my CEO at the same time, and one of the new grads, that might still be passing their probation. So I think, yeah, more stuff like that, I think, really helps on the inclusion piece.
Yeah. So I think it's when it's such a small team, it often is down to, I think, like doing it, like you said, in such a powerful way where you bring people together to share. Often more for a smaller team, I've just been more on the other end of either having a manager that's there for me, that kind of gives me the space if I need anything specific, or on the other hand, having managed a team, if people need different time off or different kind of exceptions because of their very different situations, just being very kind of comfortable to give people the freedom to work the way they want to. I think especially in startups, it's so natural, but looking back before, I suppose in bigger companies or in the past, it wasn't, just that people now can feel so flexible about the way that they want to work. And it's definitely, I think that hopefully lets people feel like they can have the freedom to sort of be diverse, but also included in the team without feeling like they have to change who they are. Something that happened, something that someone else put on a few jobs ago, was bringing a smaller team together and asking them to bring a memento from their life, and then to sort of share that story within the team about like why they had brought that memento and why it was special to them. And it kind of reminded me of what you were talking about, Brittany. And I think it was a really special experience because it actually, people really opened up about things that were really personal to them. And I think I then realized just how little I had gotten to know a lot of people in the team, even though I worked with them every day. So that was a really nice exercise that I would recommend. And it certainly helped us to sort of understand a bit more who each other was and the different challenges they had to. Yeah.
I think that's a really cool idea. It reminded me of something that one of our teams, one of our regional teams, who are based in, they're in several places, in Estonia, Budapest and London. And at the start of the lockdown, when everyone was sort of at home and it was probably a month or two in, we were starting to struggle a bit with it. And I went along to one of their sessions and someone said, we did this exercise at the start and we all brought an item that defines us or something like that. It wasn't like from a past job, but it was the same principle. And they just had this amazing conversation and they were like, it just reminded us that we're all humans, and everyone felt 100% better afterwards. And it's like, we should just do that more, shouldn't we? Like every team should probably do that, especially at the moment because we're all separate and we don't have like those pub trips or like chats in the office that we used to.
So true.
Amazing. I think there's so much that we've all taken away from today, but I guess the most powerful thing that we can all do is to just have the conversation, to just talk about it and to be open and honest about where you're at with it. And it's okay not to know where the answers are, but it's thinking about how you're going to move forward. And it's just lifting the lid on the conversation and just get started. I know some companies can spend a bit of time shying away from wanting to talk about it because perhaps they feel a little bit embarrassed with their data, but it's like, let's just address it and move forward. So I think hopefully from today's session, and for those that have joined in, like just talking about these things has helped people to come away maybe with, you know, 1 or 2 initiatives that they want to implement in their companies. But I mean, I've learned quite a lot, and I love that last idea about, you know, a memento or an item that means something to you. Like, it's so powerful. Yeah, I'm totally using that in a meeting. But yeah, I'm just conscious of time. I know I think we've got another question from the audience, but we'll make sure to follow up offline. But it just leads me to want to thank everybody that's joined today. Thank you to Sarah, to Margot, to Brittany, and to Sharon for our panelists, to Charmaine and Lorena for setting this up, and for Andras being the guy with the IT wizardry. And thank you to everyone that's taken time out this evening, or wherever you are in the world, to join into this discussion. We'll be sending out an email after to just get some feedback, because we'd love to keep doing this type of session. And for that, we need to know like how this went and how we could change it, or what worked really well. So please do share your feedback as transparent as you feel comfortable to do so. But otherwise, I will leave you all to enjoy what's left of your evening or morning or wherever you are.